afternoon, everybody. So I got to introduce Dick, our speaker this afternoon. Dick Williams was the mayor of Clinton. I didn't know this, so I learned something putting this together. Mayor of Clinton from 1987 to 1997. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I know you will. He's promoted history for most of his life. Former social studies teacher and assistant principal at Whitesboro High School. He has been the official historian for Kirkland, Clinton, and Big Moose Community Chapel. Dick was Clinton Historical Society president twice. He is a driving force in the Association of Public Historians of New York State and Oneida County Historians Association. His books include Clinton American Revolutionary War Bicentennial Booklet, along Oriskany and Big Creeks, and his latest book, which he's going to talk about today, Oneida County Land Patents. Please give a hand to Mr. Dick Williams.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'm going to put this up here. Today's right. Well, yes, I have written a book. I've written a few other books. They're a lot of work, but sometimes you just have to do it, you know? And I first heard about land grants. I didn't know a thing about land grants, and I'm not sure if it's officially grants or patents. So if I say land grants today, I'm talking about land patents, and I'll explain all that later. So some places you see them as land grants, other times land patents. I grew up in Clinton, right 8 or 10 miles away from here, and I didn't know till about I was 35 years old that Clinton was on the Cox Patent, C-O-X-E patent. So I was sort of intrigued by that, never having known what a patent was. I mean, you think of inventions, you know, but so I started a little clipping file back then. And a couple of years ago, as some of you know, I moved from my big house in Clinton to Prestwick Glen. So I had a major downsizing situation. I mean, major. I had lots of files, lots of books, and I gave stuff to this society, to Clinton Society. I threw stuff away, but I kept my land grant file. And last winter, I was going through it again. I said, well, what do? Throw it out? Should I throw it out or write a book? So I decided to write a book. So here's a book. This is not really, this was just a private printing. I printed about 30, and they are available for sale here today if you should want one. Although we'd be happy if you want to buy one, but they're quite expensive because I have beautiful colored maps in the back. And if any of you do any printing, you know that printing in color is not cheap. Anyhow, George would be happy to sell you one in the back there, and I'd be happy to autograph it. Okay, so let's roll here if I can find my, I love these automatic devices. They turn off if you don't use them every so many minutes, you know? Okay, here we go. Okay, land grants. I'm taking you back to the colonial period. Does anybody remember the colonial period? You're all too young, right? I don't remember it either, but it was common in colonies, and I need not talk to you about all the exploration and everything. It was acreage given by the governors as the king's rep. Now, the king owned all the land in the realm. That was part of British law. But he delegated much, and he delegated this chore to his colonial governors, who he appointed. So he appointed his buddies as governors, and they then gave the land that they didn't own, but which they were governor of, to their buddies. So this is a big buddy system. A lot of graft, a lot of corruption, which we'll talk about. Can you believe having graft and corruption back in the colonial period? No, you don't believe that, right? So this is what happened. Of course, the Dutch were the first ones who were here after 1609 when Henry Hudson came up the Hudson. And they established what they called patroons, which you see here. They sometimes call them manors. And there were 4 or 5 big ones, and there were some smaller ones. And I got a map later on. And then, of course, the British, when they came in 1664, the land grant situation really sort of accelerated, and more of them were given. Okay. So the Dutch policy, the Dutch West India Company was the corporation that basically paid for the voyages and the ships and so forth. And there weren't too many settlers came over. The Dutch, I didn't know much about this till I did this research. The Dutch really were not settlers. I mean, some did settle here, but unlike the English colonies, like the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Dutch had a lot less people here by 1780 than did the English colonies. But the Dutch did have, they did try to get the privileges, because what was the major item of commerce? It was furs, right? Indians had to bring the furs to Albany, to Fort Orange or Fort Nassau. So the Dutch tried to buy Indian land. They tried to establish fur traders. I guess fur hats and fur items were very, very desirable in Europe back at that time. So we had in 1614, Albany or Fort Nassau was built, and then Fort Orange in 1624. And some Walloon families came in 1624. The Walloons were a French-speaking people from France. So then, as you see here, 1664, then the British took over without even firing a shot, did they? I don't think. And they were driven mainly by commercial reasons. They were not settlers like the English and some of the others. They were here to do business. They were businessmen and women. They also brought over with them their values of diversity, which today happens to be a buzzword again, isn't it? But the Dutch were really good about toleration and ethnic and religious diversity and openness back at that time. They were maybe the forerunners to what's happening today, I don't know. But they appreciated cultural pluralism. And the Dutch Reformed Church came with them. But here's a big but. In this case, the civil authority was over the church. So in this colony, the church was not on top of the colonial administrators. Okay, then after the Dutch left is when a lot of hanky-panky went on with all these land grants. And I've done some research, obviously. I didn't make all this up, by the way, in case you're wondering. But there's not too much about land grants. But I did find out that the first governor and then the second one were really big into giving grants away. And one critic said, he termed the word rascality. That's a new word, right? Rascality. I love that word. In other words, the governors were really being corrupt. They were being rascals in giving their grants away. Now, these grants were not deeds. I must distinguish between a grant and a deed. When you buy a house in New Hartford, you get a deed for the meets and bounds. A surveyor checks it out, and they put in iron pipes and so forth. And that's your description of where you are. Well, they didn't have a survey back in 1664 of the whole state of New York, did they? So they gave just thousands of acres. They gave like 30,000 acres to one guy and 20,000 to another guy. And so, hence the term looseness of grants. It was, there was some debate as to where their boundaries were. There were some disputes between different grant holders because they said, well, that's mine. No, he said, that's mine. So it was not done too well in terms of precise situations, but it was done that way. And I found out that by 1683, I was quite shocked to read that 3/4 of the land in New York at that time was owned by 10 to 11 men. Now, this is basically the Hudson Valley. They were not here yet. No Oneida County land grants were involved at that time. So this process was subject to graft and corruption, and fees were required. The nobility that wanted the land would have to go to the attorney general and the governor and clerks, and there were fees all the way through there. And sometimes the governors put their own names on these grants. And sometimes they wanted 1/3 of the land for themselves. So in 1700, they annulled some of these earlier grants of over 2,000 acres, limiting them to 2,000 acres. But I'm not sure how strict that was kept either, because it was quite a corrupt situation. And then they'd get this document. They'd have to go to England for the king to put his seal on it. See, so it was quite a bureaucratic process. It took quite a while. And every step had a layer of graft that was involved there. But the The Dutch and then the English did persevere and did give land to their favorite people. And the Dutch had what we call manors, as opposed to the term land grant. But there were these four: the Rensselaer, and I got a map later on. Rensselaer, Wick, Cortland, Livingston, and there's a Pelham in Westchester County. So there were four major manors, and a lot of land grants after the Dutch left. But interestingly, there's one statistic here. By 1756, Pennsylvania had 220,000 settlers. How many did New York have? 96,000. That indicates how the Dutch did not really do this for settling reasons. They did it for commercial reasons, the fur trade. So this is why the population was so different between Pennsylvania and New York. And New York, though, did become, even though a smaller population, because of the Dutch and their toleration, was more ethnically diverse. There were these manors, but also there were smaller farms here in New York State, or New York County at that time. This shows, I don't know if I can use my pointer. Can you see that? That one there is Rensselaer Wick. It's on both sides of the Hudson, south of Albany. Do you see that in the pink there? This was one of the other ones down on the Hudson too. So they're all in the Hudson Valley, those four that I just showed you. Pelham, Rensselaer, Wick, Cortland, and Livingston. Those, of course, those names, Cortland and Livingston, are big names. Rensselaer. You see where we're coming from here with the Dutch, huh? Okay. Pelham doesn't sound too Dutch to me, but anyhow, he got some land too. Okay, so those are the four big ones when the Dutch were here. And this shows the colony back at that time. And of course, we are right here. Here's the Great Carry between Wood Creek and the Mohawk River. So, the patroons I mentioned earlier were sometimes 8 miles on each side of the river, and the patroon, the boss, basically had executive, legislative, and judicial powers over his realm or his manor. And quit rents were a tax on the occupants. This comes back from the feudal times, but it continued into the 1830s after we broke away from Britain. We still had quit rents, and if you buy my book, you'll see a little story about that. Okay, what else we got here? Also, if any gold or silver was found, this became crown property. They were always looking for the big mast for their sailboats, you know, and they did not want people to burn to clear the land. Those were some of the stipulations in the grants. Now, I realize this is awful small, but it does show in the eastern part of the state, or the county, there are little red lines here, which I know you can't see, but there were tons and tons of colonial land grants. My book is mainly on the ones afterwards. And here in color are some of the bigger ones. The one in red right there is the Rensselaer Wick. Right there. And so those are, again, that's the Hudson Valley, and of course we are over on the left side. Okay, let's go now more towards the Cox Patent, which was the basis of my interest in this whole procedure. In doing research about the Cox Patent, and I found out there weren't too many books about this, so I had to find different sources. I got books from libraries in different parts of the country, and I found out that King Charles, back in the 1620s, gave land in Carolina called the Heath Patent to his Attorney General over in England, Robert Heath. And he gave him all the land between, I forget the latitude lines, it's basically between Florida and Virginia, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, right? So he got all this land. It was called the Heath Patent, and here's a map of it here. And his family lost it around 1690s, and it became a Cox family. To get to the Cox family, they were also wealthy people who had lots of land in New Jersey and New York State. They were given, they gave up their claim to the Heath Patent, which they had acquired around the middle of the 1600s, and they got 100,000 acres in New York State. Now, I could not find out why. I've done research, And I don't know why the king made that deal. I don't know. But that's what happened. So this map, which okay, well this is kind of small detail, but you can see, I'm sure you can see the Oneida County here, and if I can stand back, or can I take this off? I guess not. Yeah, I can, okay. Of course, we are right up here. Here's Oneida Lake, and here's the Cosby Manor. You ever heard of Cosby Manor Road? Well, Cosby was one of the early governors. So Cosby Manor was land that he gave away to about 22 different people. And Cox Patent, though, is right here. This is the Cox Patent. It goes from Rome. Here's Rome. This line here is the 1768 Fort Stanwix Treaty Line, which was, remember, Sir William Johnson had a conference at Fort Stanwix, and he got the Indians together and the British people, and the Indians were complaining about the white man encroaching. Can you imagine the white man encroaching? Well, they did. So Johnson calls this big treaty, brings in lots of food and trinkets and rum, and they made a deal. The deal was that the Indians, should stay east of this line. I mean, they could stay west of it, and the settlers east of it. Well, it was a major failure in colonial policy, obviously. But that's what happened at that time. So here are all there's about 40 patents in Oneida County. Every inch of Oneida County was in somebody's patent. So if you live in Oneida County, you want to trace back far enough, you'll find that it was in somebody's patent. It could be Cox, it could be Cosby Manor, it could be Scriba. If you're up in Camden, it might have been Scriba, or up here it might have been Agate and Remsenburg and, Fonda's patent. So the whole county was a patent. It's in somebody's patent in the colonial period, and a few were actually given after the Revolutionary War. A few, not very many. So this is what the map of the land grants and patents in Oneida County looks like. And here are some. I know this is not too good, but this is the Oriskany patent. The Oriskany patent went on both sides of the Mohawk River. This map, by the way, Rome is over here, Utica's here. So the map should be tipped a little bit, but anyhow, this is the Oriskany patent. And this is one of the earliest ones. And this was on both sides of the Mohawk River between Utica and Rome. Here is a little better map showing that colonial line I was talking about. The red line is the Fort Stanwix Treaty Line. But before that, in 1763, if you remember your American history, there was a proclamation that they should not cross over that line. Again, that was not too effective as colonial policy either. So those two lines. This is just a map showing this part of the country in the colonial period when we only had 5 nations. The Iroquois now can claim 6 nations because in the early 1700s, they were the Tuscaroras came up from the Carolinas, okay? So that's what happened there. And you'll notice how this map is a little off in terms of the lakes, the Finger Lakes and so forth. But that was early cartography. Here again is a map of Oneida County again, a hand-drawn map. I don't know who drew it, but it has some of obviously the same patents. And just to give you some context here, that the rest of the state was not completely ignored, and there weren't so many patents in the rest of the state, but some big money people did purchase land out in the western part of the state. The Howland Land Company, the Phelps and Gorham Purchase, the Morris Purchase, and then there was the military tract around Syracuse from roughly Oneida to Auburn, which is called the military tract on this map. And that was supposedly for soldiers from the Revolutionary War. Very few of them actually settled. Most of them sold their land, just like most of the big patent holders. I mean, the Governor Cosby never lived on his land. These guys are all speculators. All of our early founding fathers and military leaders were land speculators. Maybe I shouldn't say all. But George Washington, when he died, I got a copy of his will. He had land in Virginia, he had land up here, he had land in Pennsylvania, he had land in Maryland. all these guys were big landowners. Well, back then, land was money, right? There wasn't much currency around. So land was the coin of the realm, so to speak, right? Okay. This shows the military tract a little more detail, and all these maps are in the book. And all those towns down around Cortland have Greek names, right? Like Groton and so forth from the Greeks. This is before expansion in 1790. Again, we have the Hudson Valley here, and of course we're up here. There's the military tract right there. So this is a somewhat colorful map of the various patents in the Hudson Valley and the Mohawk, and of course you notice the Adirondacks was given away by that time, but there were hardly any settlers up there, and there were a few people up in the Lake Champlain area, but this was 1790. So you've all heard about the Great Carry, I'm sure, in Rome. This nice map shows the Wood Creek and Mohawk River, and again, as I said, the Heath Patent went from Rome along the Mohawk to Utica. So this does show very nicely Fort Stanwix right there in the middle, and this was 1769. This also shows, this is the Oneida Lake, this big blob here, and the I can't turn around, but the Great Carry is in the center part there, between the Mohawk River and Wood Creek. Another picture of the same thing. These are some old maps. I'm not sure how accurate they all are, but they were pretty good. This simply shows the Lake Ontario, and again, down the bottom of the map is the Carry at Rome, and so forth. And this also is another map of the Mohawk River showing some of the grants east of us. There were many grants east of us between here and Albany. And this just shows, again, an old map. I'm not sure what all these funny lines are in here, but the Oneida Lake is up upper left here, and of course the river, here's the Hudson River and the Mohawk. So, as I say, around the state there were numerous. I don't know how many total in the state. There were over 40 patents in Oneida County alone, which seems a little high, but that's what it was. Here's the Canajoharie Patent, 1815. So this was after the Revolutionary War. So they were still giving land away after the war. The governors were. And here's on the south side of the Mohawk around Little Falls area. So they had better surveys at this time. And this is another one, 1790 from the DeWitt map. And here's Cosby Manor. You probably can't see it, but Cosby Manor, at the far left is the Carry in Rome, where Wood Creek and the Mohawk River. And Cosby Manor, which is today Cosby Manor Road, North Utica. Cosby was the governor. He's one of the more crooked governors, Cosby was. If you live there, I'm sorry. And again, this shows some other patents south of the Mohawk towards Albany. Just to let you know, it was not just this county. It was all done throughout the eastern part of the state. The exception was those like the Holland Land Company way out west. That these big land companies got the land and they sold it. Everybody sold their land. They didn't settle. Most of these big people who got the land just sold it and got out. Okay, we're getting down to Cox Patent, which was what got me going 50 years ago. And this is from an old map that we did find. And on the top, maybe you can't see it, and I can't turn to show you, but at the top is the Mohawk River. The bottom straight line, left to right, is the 1768 Fort Stanwix Treaty Line. Okay, and I'll show you where Clinton is in just a moment. But Rome is to the far left, Rome is over here, and Bridgewater is to the far right. A little better map. It was called Coxborough Patent. It had 7 divisions. They divided the land up into 7 divisions. The first division is over in the far left in Rome, and the 7th is in the far right down by Bridgewater. And again, that bottom straight line is the 1768 Fort Stanwix Treaty Line, so remember that. Here's Tryon County, and this again shows the Cary and Rome, which maybe you can't see it over here. Then this is the Mohawk, and here's West Canada Creek. And here's Daniel Cox's name on, here's the Cox Patent right here. Right there. Daniel Cox was one of the owners. There were 4 owners of the patent. Clinton is in green here. The village of Clinton is in the section in the 6th Division, and it's been circled with this map so you can see it. But 4 Cox family members, Daniel, Rebecca, William, and John Tabor Kemp. He married a Cox. He married Grace Cox. So that's why you see all these different initials. If you can look at this map up close, every parcel has initials on it, either DC or WC or JTK or whatever. So they're all assigned to those people of the Cox family. More of the same, again, Clinton is in the green in the middle, Rome is in the far left, and the Mohawk River swings across the top. Here's a close-up of the 7th Division, which would be down near Bridgewater, and Clinton would be in the lower left. Also, I just threw this map in of Clinton in 1830. That's the village of Clinton. Just because I've lived there so many years, I thought you want to see Clinton, right? But the Shenango Canal was going through, so it was after 1835. Now, here's a strange part of this story. I told you how the Heath Patent in North Carolina was traded. I mean, the Cox family they gave up their rights to the one in Carolina, and they got 100,000 acres in Oneida County, or in New York State. Well, I've been trying to find all these acres, and I found out, to my surprise, that it was not just here in Oneida County. It was also, they gave about 25,000 acres in Tioga County. This is a map of Tioga County just west of Binghamton. And that curved line at the top is the Susquehanna River. But Binghamton would be off the map to the far right. And we'll get back to that in a few minutes. This just shows you how the Indians, they were settled pretty much here by this time. This is 1857, but they were in the reservations by then. Of course, we are right here. Okay, so what happened after the war? Well, the problem was that some of these people who had these patents were loyalists. You know what a loyalist was? Well, the ones who were loyalists were subject to a law. It's in the book on the back pages of 1779. They passed the Confiscation Act of 1779 that the New York legislature did. And this basically confiscated all lands of people who were loyalists. So in the case of the Cox Patents, of the 4 members of that family who were given that land, William, Daniel, and Rebecca Cox, and John Tabor Kemp, who was married to a Cox, Kemp was the only one who was a loyalist. He had been the Attorney General for the governor of New York, of the county of New York, so he was a loyalist, right? So that map I just showed you, maybe I'll back up here for a moment. Okay, of these lands, and you can't see whose initials are on which part there, but if it says DC or WC, they're okay. That's Daniel or William Cox. I'm not sure how they figured out who was loyalist and who wasn't, because they were all part of the same family. But John Tabor Kemp, he was actually Attorney General for the county of New York, so he was really pro-British, right? So all his parcels here that you see were confiscated, along with 57 other people, whose names you can't read here. This is in the book if you want to buy the book. But people like some of the Johnsons down the Mohawk Valley, they had their land confiscated. There are 57 people here. There's about Guy Johnson's one, Sir John Johnson. I'm just reading some of the Delancey's. Colden, he was a former governor. So people who were officials of the colony and who had this land, they lost their land. Now, what does confiscation mean? It's sometimes called the Bill of Attainder. If you know your Constitution, there's a clause in the U.S. Constitution which says the government cannot pass a Bill of Attainder. A Bill of Attainder means that your property, you're considered a criminal and you're tried and convicted without a trial. I mean, you're not tried, you're just convicted without a trial. So all these people had no trial, no due process. They lost their lands. Now, how they were determined exactly by the colonial or by the government at that time, I don't know. Because Governor George Clinton, he must have known some of these people too. And they knew, I guess, who were the loyalists and who weren't. So all these parcels had to be sold, and the state made money selling all these confiscated loyalist parcels. Okay? But in the Cox Patent, it's sort of interesting because only 1/4 of the parcels were owned by the Attorney General, Mr. John Kent Tabor. So the other 3 people of the Cox family were able to sell their lands. So they became landowners and they sold their parcels. The village of Clinton, for example, was settled in 1787 by Moses Foote and some other people from Connecticut. They thought they were on free land, but they found some marks on trees as if surveyors had been there a while back. Well, they had been there a while back. They discovered that Clinton and all the parcel I've shown you here of this Cox Patent, the other 3 people, Daniel, William, and Rebecca Cox, they could sell their land. So the early settlers of Clinton discovered that they were on land they thought was free, but it was not free. It was owned by somebody in Philadelphia. So Moses Foote, the founder of Clinton, went to Philadelphia and bought the land for six pence an acre. I don't know what the price was then, and that's what happened. And the state could sell the land that the Attorney General had, who had married a Cox. So the state sold lots of land and made some money back at that time. The states were anxious to do this because they didn't have many sources of income back at that time. There was no income tax, no sales tax, so that was a big possible revenue source for the colonies. So this is what happened there. Okay, I think we're about ready to wrap it up here. This again is in the book if you want to look all through the names. But here are some of the big names. William Tryon, he was a former governor. He's the governor who, he was the last colonial governor of New York, and he escaped to New York City when as the war started, and he actually spent most of the war on a British ship in New York Harbor. Then John Tabor Kemp, he was the one who was the Attorney General who married a Cox, and he was attainted. Delancey, that's a famous name. John Johnson, Guy Johnson, Daniel Klaus, John Butler, Philip Skeen, Edward Jessup. Jessup owned lots of land up in the Adirondacks. A couple of girls, Susanna Robinson and Mary Morris. I don't know what their connections were, but they were attainted too. They lost their lands. And Henry Clinton, I'm not sure if he was the general or he might have been some relation to the governor. I don't know. So over the years, the original landowners, they sold the land. Some lands went bankrupt. I mean, not all the lands was sold right away. It took a while. But eventually the smaller farmers who were now here to settle, they weren't involved in fur trade anymore. The fur trade was sort of dying. So this now became a brand new state of colonists who lived here and farmed and wanted to stay here. So also we had some big landowners too, like the great camps in the Adirondacks, so the Whitneys and the Vanderbilts and so forth. So the land, as I say, if you have land any place in the state, in the central or eastern part, you check your title way back, you're going to find it was on somebody's patent, and it was probably sold many times. It's quite interesting how some famous names in American history, Aaron Burr, Alexander Hamilton, they were all lawyers on some of these forfeitures and bankruptcies because this land was acquired by one person, that he took out a mortgage, he lost the mortgage. I mean, it's a real mess. It's very hard to trace a lot of these mortgages, a lot of this land ownership. It's a very complicated thing unless you're a title expert. But basically, all the landowners sold their land, and that's all I wanted to tell you about today, except one more thing. One more thing. I have up here, which I don't have enough to pass out. I'm sorry I'm away from the camera. I'll get back. There is one copy of an indenture. Just, let me hold up one. This is what they call an indenture, and it's a meets and bounds. This is back when they started to do the meets and bounds more accurately. And this is for the Boone patent and the clock patent. And there up in the town, a section of the town of Booneville was given to Remsen at that time. So this is an explanation. It's describing from a maple tree to a rock. You know, so it's crazy how they did that back then, because that maple tree has probably been dead for a couple of years, right? It's probably been somebody's fireplace in 1710. So, but this is what you find. Look at it, see what that indenture looks like. And if you go back in your family or your house history, you might find some things like this. They're called indentures, but they're basically just a transfer of property. So I wanted to mention that to you, and I guess that was all I wanted to say. Okay, any questions? I'd be happy to try to answer questions. I'll stay here, so I'll be on the microphone, I guess. Yes.
I want to know about the Sadaquata pit.
The who? The what?
Sadaquata.
She wants to know about the Sadaquata pet.
Well, it's on the map. It's sometimes called the Sequoia Patent, but it's just around Utica, there, around the northern part of Utica. There's a nice map in here that shows it. It was on the screen earlier, but if you want to look at this later, you can. But that was one of the earlier ones, Sadaquata.
How early? Before in the Cox period?
It was before that, I believe, one of the early 1800s, I believe. Again, that's all. I have all the 40 patents are listed in here, with a little history of each one, and what year they were granted, and how many acres. Okay? Any other questions? Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.